Ichiro Suzuki, Billy Wagner, C.C. Sabathia. These baseball greats are headed to Cooperstown as part of the 2025 Baseball Hall of Fame inductees. Join us as we rate if the writers made the right picks, who missed selection this year, and our personal choices for players that deserve enshrinement in the Hall. Today, on Rounders, a history of baseball in America. All right, folks, welcome to our first live streamed episode of Rounders. You're joining me here in person with our special guest, John Vampatella. We're going to be talking about the 2025 Hall of Fame inductions, which were announced 48 hours ago, I believe, John.
Yep, it's fresh off the presses, basically.
Yep. So we're coming in. We want to give you our reactions to the selections that were made, as well as talk about some of the names that didn't make it in this year. And then we want to finalize by talking about our all-time picks, who we think maybe got skipped over or who hasn't been inducted yet, who we think should get that nod if we were in charge, if we were the one writer who was able to make that decision. So before we start, if you're new to the show, I want to briefly introduce you, John. This is your third appearance on the show. You were here in 2021 to talk about your first book about Game 4, I believe, of the ALCS.
See, you've forgotten it already. It's the book is called The Forgotten Game, and it's about Game 5 of the ALCS.
Game 5, that's right. Yes. And then we had you back as well to talk about the 54th Man, your second book last year in February, which was about an NFL slant, if I remember right, the 54th man that's selected on each roster, that last guy, correct?
Yep. So, they're 53 guys on an NFL roster. And so I just did a pretty interesting look at the lives of some of the guys who are just fighting to make it in the NFL. Everyone focuses on the superstars, Tom Brady's, Pat Mahomes, those kind of guys. But the reality is most of the guys in the league are not those guys. And it's guys just trying to scratch out a living and somehow, make it for a few years in the NFL. So it was a really fun book to write.
Yeah, I will put links to both of them in the show notes for you to check out if you're new to the show, if this is your first time watching John. Both great reads. And I just want to thank you for coming back on the show. It's great to talk baseball. It's something I think we're making an annual treat to do.
For sure. I love being on the show with you. I love talking baseball with guys I like. So I'd do this every day if we only had time to do that.
Maybe someday. We'll see how it goes.
There you go.
Well, folks, before we jump into the names that were selected for this year, just very briefly, like we did last year, John, if you're unfamiliar with the selection process for the National Baseball Hall of Fame, there's two ways that you can get in. One of them is through being elected by the Baseball Writers Association of America. They have a threshold of 75% that you need to make in order to be able to be selected. So there's 394 members in the BBWAA. You have to be some sort of beat writer or a backup writer or a columnist or a sports editor to be able to get your name on that list. You have to cover Major League Baseball essentially for a news service. And you get a choice in that every year. So that's one way you can get in. That's the one we look at the most. We're going to be talking a lot about percentages tonight. What did players get for percentages of this vote? How close are they? Did they get over the threshold? That's what we're referring to. And then there's the second way you can get in, which we do see every now and then, which is where you can be selected by a committee that's commissioned by Major League Baseball. So these are called eras committees. There's eras committees for retirement. They're no longer eligible on the ballot for the BBWAA to vote. We look at managers. They can look at umpires, executives. I mean, all these individuals are able to give input to be able to decide who that could be. So there's always interesting names that come up for these committees as well. So those are the two ways that you can get in. We're going to look at the three that were selected by the BBWAA for this year. Those three are, it's a shorter list than last year. We've got Ichiro Suzuki, we've got C.C. Sabathia, and we've got Billy Wagner. So those are the three names we're going to discuss for tonight. So how this is going to work, this format, we're going to introduce each name. I'm going to go through a quick snapshot of their career in case you're unfamiliar with their background, talk about the percentage they got to get into the hall this year, and then John and I are going to give our reactions to the writer's decision, and if we agree with it or not, maybe some reasoning why. So let's go ahead and jump into it. What do you think, John?
Love it. Love it. I love talking baseball. I love talking great players, and this should be a lot of fun. So let's start with Ichiro. Why don't we start with him?
Yeah, so here we go. Ichiro, 19 seasons in Major League Baseball. He played, of course, with the Seattle Mariners. That's how I remember him as a kid growing up and watching him play. He also had stints with the New York Yankees and the Miami Marlins, which, kind of rounds out a career. Not a lot of teams that he played for, but those are the three main ones. What about his stats, John? What are his career stats that we're looking at?
Well, for him, the biggest thing is the sheer number of hits. Very interestingly, Ichiro didn't make it to the majors until he was 27 years old. Of course, he played for a long time in Japan before jumping across the Pacific to Seattle. So he got a late start in terms of his major league career, but he did play till he was 45 years old, which is crazy. And of course, at age 45, he hardly played at all, played in 2 games. But still, just to be a major league player at age 45 is pretty ridiculous. But he accumulated 3,089 hits, had a career batting average of 311, stole a ton of bases, 509 for his career. Those are the big numbers that jump off the page. But he was also a superlative defensive player and just an all-around tremendous athlete and hitter. Put up some pretty mind-boggling numbers when you consider he only started at age 27.
Yeah, the 10 gold gloves he was able to rack up. He was a 10-time All-Star. He won the American League MVP in 2001, kind of to cap that off. He was also Rookie of the Year. I mean, this guy, unbelievable career, like you said, even with the late start. He got 99.7% of the votes. He was one vote shy. One guy decided not to vote for Ichiro this year, which kind of took away that bragging right of being a unanimous selection, unfortunately. One guy, unbelievable. And I think
we spent a little bit of time talking about that, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I agree. I think Ichiro had something to say about that in a recent interview. He did. Do you remember off the top of your head? I'm trying to.
Yeah, what he basically said, I can't quote him exactly, but he basically said, "Hey, I'd like to have that one guy over to my house for a drink and a chat," is what he was saying. And I can't imagine what that conversation would be like.
Love to be a fly on the wall for that conversation. Absolutely. And without forgetting, I think a major accomplishment as well that we can add to this, he's the first Japanese position player to be enshrined in Cooperstown. So not to be, withheld on that particular point as well. So Ichiro, 99.7 of the vote. John, how did you feel about this choice? What's your reaction?
Well, when I looked at the ballot this year, he was the first name, obviously, that jumped off the page as a no doubt, no brainer. Like, how can you not vote for this guy? He's everything you want in a Hall of Famer, a legendary player. He, as you talked about, he was really the tip of the spear in terms of great Japanese players. We've seen a lot more come through since then. And it's not like there weren't good players that came through before, but he was clearly the greatest to come over, and he represented a cultural shift. Nothing less than that, nothing short of that. He became a Japanese megastar in the U.S. He obviously was a tremendous baseball player. I'm just really annoyed at the one guy who didn't vote for him, and I don't even know who it was, and I don't know the reasoning. There's been no word on that. I suspect, and others have suspected, that it's because they just want. I think Mariano's the only guy to be a unanimous Hall of Famer, and people don't want to somehow make there a second guy. I'm just like, look, if a player is an obvious Hall of Famer, and you're not playing these games where it's like, well, I got to give a vote to another guy to keep him on the ballot longer, which I don't even like that, because I think you vote for the guys who are Hall of Famers and you're just done with it. Right. But how does this guy not vote for Ichiro Suzuki? It's just an absolute no-brainer. The guy should be in the Hall of Fame. I'm glad he made it, but he should have been unanimous easily. No question about it.
I agree with you on that. I think it's a no-brainer that you put him in the Hall. I think robbing him of that unanimous selection is unfortunate, because when you think of iconic players, especially someone that represents a country that is as supportive and excited about baseball as Japan, I think this would have been a great gesture on top of an amazing career to give him that unanimous selection. And I tried to go through and think, okay, was there any solid reasoning here to be able to hold that back? What are some of the criticisms? I couldn't really find any, John. There was one stat I found in an article, an editorial, that talked about how Ichiro had a relatively low on-base plus slugging percentage compared to his peers. So he didn't score as many runs essentially as the other individuals who were at that same position during the time that he played. But to me, that's just nitpicking at that point. If you think that that's enough to be able to withhold that first year induction for him, there's no reason for that. So shame on you, one writer who decided to hold back that vote. So I think we both say, good job on this selection. We're going to put a poll out to our audience members and ask them what they think, and I'll make sure to share that in the newsletter if they agreed with this pick as well or not. So there we have Ichiro in the books. First selection made by the BBWAA. Let's go on to, I think, a more controversial one out of the three. For the next selection, we had CC Sabathia elected to the Hall of Fame. He got in with 86.8% of the vote. And this was his first year of eligibility, John. So I was surprised, I think, and I'll explain why in a little bit. Just to run through the numbers, if you're unfamiliar with CC's career, he played for 19 seasons in the MLB. That spread across the Cleveland Indians, the Milwaukee Brewers, and the New York Yankees. Now, the stats are impressive. I'm not going to take that away from him. Can you give us a rundown, a quick snapshot of those stats, John?
Sure. The biggest thing that jumps out is the old school win total, 251 career wins, which we won't see too many guys from now on, unless the game changes radically. We just won't see too many guys get to that number. I know for a lot of people, wins don't really matter at this point, but if you can accumulate 251 wins as a pitcher, as a starting pitcher, you're doing something right for a long period of time. So he accumulated a ton of wins, pitched a ton of innings, almost 3,600 innings, had a good ERA, not an outstanding ERA for a Hall of Famer, 3.74. That's a little high. Yeah. But he pitched a ton of innings, was just super effective. And I wouldn't even call him what we would consider to be a compiler, just an average guy or slightly above average who just played for a long time. He had some great seasons. He won one Cy Young Award. He was top 5 in the Cy Young voting 5 times. So at his peak, he was an absolutely elite starting pitcher that was widely considered to be among the very best in the game. He was a 6-time All-Star. He won an ALCS MVP. He won a World Series with the Yankees. He's got that Cy Young Award. So he didn't just compile stats over a long period. He was elite for quite a few years. Just a very impressive overall resume.
Absolutely. It stretched over a very long time, to your point. So when you take all into consideration, John, what are your thoughts on this pick? How do you feel?
So, yeah, I kind of had a similar thought that you did, that I was unsure how this was going to shake out. I am pretty convinced that he's a legit Hall of Famer. If I had a vote, I would have voted for him this year, but I wasn't sure that he was going to get in this year. I thought maybe we'd see a year or two before he got in, because the ERA is high. And even though he was effective for a long period of time and obviously very, very, very good, usually you think of an ERA that's 3.74 for his career, and you think, no, that's not Hall of Fame level. So I could totally see why somebody would be a little bit hesitant on him. But I came down to, look, top 5 Cy Young Award 5 times, winning it once, 251 career wins, World Series champ. He checked all the boxes for me, so I definitely would have voted him in. I think they got the right call. I'm a little surprised that he got almost 89% of the vote. That's I thought he'd be, if he made it this year, he'd be pretty much barely above the 75% threshold.
I agree. I was surprised at the high number of individuals that ended up voting for him, especially in his first year. If he was in his 5th or 6th, and it was climbing up okay, but to have that high of a percentage first year. And I got to tell you, John, for my reaction, I'm not sold on CC. I'll listen to more arguments about this, but to be a first year inductee, I can't get there. And there's a couple reasons why. You mentioned the first one. He's got a really high career ERA. I mean, 3.74. That's higher than most Hall of Fame pitchers. So if we're looking at trying to compare him to other starters, he definitely is barely there. So there's that. The second thing, for me, I look at excellence a lot over the course of one's career. He only had one Cy Young Award. And I can think of other pitchers, I'm going to talk about one later on in the episode, that had multiple Cy Young Awards that were passed on to get into the Hall. And to have just that one accolade, even if he had some great seasons outside of that, to me, that's below the threshold at where I'm at right now in terms of him being able to get that first year induction. And then the third one that just really sticks in my craw, he was not consistent throughout his career. And I think when we look at a lot of Hall of Fame pitchers, there was some level of dominance on display throughout the career. You could point maybe 1 or 2 seasons here and there for certain guys, but CC won less than 15 games from 2013 to 2019. So we're talking about 7 seasons where he was a number 3 starter, essentially, in a rotation. And he had no all-star appearances after 2012. That was the last season that he got an all-star nod. So that's a big chunk of your career where you're just not essentially helping your team win and not putting up the stats to really be in that conversation and as a top pitcher in the league. So I'm just not there.
So do you think, let me ask you this, do you think he's not a Hall of Famer at all? Or do you think I just definitely wouldn't have voted him in first ballot?
I'm willing to entertain more thoughts on this. My reaction when I was just, going back and like reviewing his career, because I remember cheering against him as a Red Sox fan many years. And I remember watching him when he was younger with the Cleveland Indians and thinking, this guy, he's a great player. But just going back and like looking at the totality of his career, I'm not there. And maybe I'd feel different if he was in, like I said, his 7th or his 8th year. Okay, he's right on the line. I'll think about it a little more seriously. But to be a first year, 86% of the vote guy to get in, doesn't sit right.
Yeah, no, I can understand that. I do wish that he had more consistent dominant seasons. But from basically his age 25 all the way through age 31 seasons, he was absolutely elite. Again, being in the top 5 in the Cy Young race 5 times during that stretch, winning a Cy Young. He had a dominant peak. So he had a classic bell curve career, right? He started off, decent, pretty solid pitcher, not an ace, became a dominant pitcher in baseball, and then at the tail end of his career, he tailed off. So to me, for him, you had the combination of at his very best, he was absolutely elite. He was a Hall of Fame caliber when he was at his best, and that wasn't just 1 year; it was a good 5-6 year stretch. And then he also combined it with the longevity that a lot of guys don't have. A lot of guys. You hinted at a guy who's got 2 Cy Youngs, and I'm guessing his name rhymes with Bohan Montana, that I'm thinking, that you're thinking of. Maybe not, but there's some great pitchers who had great careers that were just shorter, so they couldn't compile the long-term numbers. Yeah. He did both. He was elite in his prime, which is for a good long stretch, and then he just managed to be an effective pitcher for a really, really long time. And I think when you put those things together, the totality of his career adds up to a Hall of Famer. I can totally buy the argument, not necessarily first ballot, but for me, when I look at this year's ballot, I'm like, I think he deserved to be in.
I can see where you're coming from on that. The first year, though, that's like at the end of the day, is that you're okay with that?
I'm okay with it because for me, my philosophy is if I think the guy's a Hall of Famer, he's a Hall of Famer, and the only reason I would be convinced in year 7, 8, or 9, or 10, or something like that, is if I didn't think he was I just don't think he's a Hall of Famer, period, right now. But over the years, I become more and more convinced that he was. I can't adopt a philosophy where it's like, well, sitting here year 1, I can't vote for him now, but I could see myself voting for him in year 7 or 8. It's like, well, why would you see yourself voting for him in year 7 or 8 or 9? Like, if you think he's a Hall of Famer, then he's a Hall of Famer now. It's just that if you don't think he's a Hall of Famer, period, at this point in time, but evidence comes out over the time, then I'm like, gosh, the more I think about it, then I could see that argument.
And I am open to those arguments if our listeners want to let me know some additional, thoughts. Editorialize me. I'd love to be swayed on this. I'm not there as of this year. So, but this is
with him, on the downside with him, he was a Yankee.
Yeah, so, which automatically. I'm a Red Sox fan.
That drops him a big notch, in my book for sure.
Yes, absolutely. We'll remember him in his Cleveland uniform, I guess, if we're going to make that decision. So,
well, my fondest memory of him was the 2021 playoff between the Red Sox and Yankees, and the Red Sox lit him up like a Christmas tree, and that's a great parting memory of CC Sabathia.
That's what I'll keep in my memory moving forward. Then that's a great callback, John. It's fun to reminisce about those moments. Absolutely. This is a good segue into talking about a third choice, the third guy that was selected for this year, because he did wait a full 10 years. This was his 10th year on the ballot before he was selected, and that is Billy Wagner. So Billy Wagner, reliever, spanned 16 seasons over several different teams. He played for the Astros, he played for the Phillies, he played for the Mets, played for our Red Sox, and he played for the Braves. A lot of work done across a lot of different clubs. What about his career stats? Let's look at the raw stats before we make a decision. Give me that breakdown, John. How's that looking for Billy?
Yeah, so again, for a closer, an ace reliever, you don't really look at wins, so we won't even bother with that. But he had a 2.31 career ERA, which was excellent. And every year in his career but one, he had an ERA of below 3. So he only had one season where he was above that, and even then he only pitched a partial season. So every year he was consistently excellent. 422 career saves. He had an ERA plus, which for listeners who don't know, it measures your ERA compared to the era in which you pitched in the ballpark that you mainly pitch in, of 187, which is awesome. He had, this is I think really a key stat, his career WHIP, walks plus hits divided by innings pitched, was fewer than 1. So that's outstanding. Basically, he just didn't let guys on base, and he struck out a ton of guys. Averaged 11.9 strikeouts per 9 innings, and in his prime was way better than that. Struck out nearly between 14 and 15 batters per 9 innings. So he was a dominant reliever. 7 All-Star games. He was in the top 10 in Cy Young voting twice, which for a closer is really good. Even got some MVP votes a couple of seasons. So the raw numbers were pretty substantial, and the accolades were up there too.
Absolutely. And like we said, Billy had to wait the full 10 years in order to get in. This year, he did get 82.5% of the vote, which is, well above the 75%. He didn't just squeak in, but nevertheless had to wait a long time to be able to get this nod. So for someone that just got under the door, what's your reaction to this, John?
I think these players like him represent the real challenge for voters. It really depends on what you think about relief pitchers. Because they pitch so, what's the grammatical way to say it? So many fewer innings than starters. It's hard to really gauge the impact that they have on the game. CC pitched 1 million innings. We know he was involved in a lot of games, a lot of innings, accounted for a lot of outs. Billy Wagner, not so much. And so it's like, well, how do you know if a guy like that should be in the Hall of Fame? And for that reason, there's a lot fewer Hall of Fame relief pitchers out there. So what that tells me is that in order to get into the Hall of Fame as a relief pitcher, you have to be top level. You can't just be good. You have to be elite. Mariano Rivera obviously is the gold standard for this position, but you really have to have outstanding numbers and have had just an incredible career. I think Wagner is so borderline on this. I can see the argument that he doesn't quite add up. I'm not sure that at any point in his career, people thought he is the guy that I want to turn the game over to in the ninth. Always excellent. But did he ever reach that level of dominance? That's a good, hard question. I'm not really sure. I think his numbers overall are good enough that I would have voted him in. This is one of those cases, we were just talking about this with CC. I think when he first was on the ballot, I was thinking, gosh, I don't think he's a Hall of Famer. Mm-hmm. My thinking has evolved a little bit because I think the role of a dominant reliever like him is hugely important. And I really came to appreciate that over time. So for me, I think he's a barely get in. And I think getting in on the 10th ballot is probably about right. I think that really shows how much people were wrestling with his candidacy. I'm happy to see him get in because the guy was a great great pitcher. And if he had those numbers with just more innings, it would be a no doubter. But it's just, he didn't pitch a lot as a relief pitcher. So it makes you wonder, should he be in? I would have voted him in, though I can really see the wrestling match that people had about this.
I think this reflects, like you said, the overall changing attitude towards relievers in terms of how we value them and how we, determine their greatness in order to be able to decide if they get in the Hall or not. I mean, out of the 9 relievers that are in the Hall of Fame right now, 7 of them have been inducted since the year 2000. So I think that shows the historical progression of how we view relievers. And he's part of that wave, that recent wave of saying, yes, relievers matter. These numbers, even with the lack of innings pitched and wins, do hold significance for teams and being able to just show consistency and help their team be able to dominate. I think that comes clear with Billy. And I also agree with you. I would give him the nod to get in. When you look at names, so I'm going to read, these are the other 9 relievers in the Hall of Fame. And I think he goes with these names when we think about the greatest to ever step in relief. So we've got Hoyt Wilhelm. He was the first. We've got Raleigh Fingers, Dennis Eckersley, Bruce Sutter, Goose Gossage, and then more recently we have Trevor Hoffman, Lee Smith, as you mentioned, Mariano Rivera, and then Billy Wagner. So when I look at those names and I think about Billy Wagner's career over the span and how dominant he was and consistent he was, yes, I think he belongs 100%.
Yep, I agree with you. I'm glad he's in. He was a legendary Red Sox reliever. Let's put it that way.
Absolutely.
In his 15 games with Boston in 2009. But even then, you know what? At age 37, guy was incredible. Look at his last year. So I just wanted to say this about Wagner. His last year, aged 38, he's pitching for Atlanta. He goes 7-2 with a 1.43 ERA. Pitches 69 1/3 innings. He has a whip of .865, and he strikes out 13.5 batters per 9 innings, makes the All-Star team at age 38, which was his last year. I mean, talk about going out with a bang. Guy was great from the day one he walked into the majors to the day he threw his last pitch.
You mentioned it at the beginning when we talked about him too, John. I one of the biggest stats that jumps out at me when we talk about him is that sub-3 ERA throughout his entire career. That is impressive. He pitched in a lot of different ballparks for a lot of different teams and played very late, in terms of age into that career. And to maintain that to me that's dominance. That's consistent dominance on the mound. So those are our 3, folks. Those are the 3 that were selected. We, had some differing points on CC. Overall, good selections here by the Baseball Writers Association of America. There were some individuals that did not get in this year who we want to talk about to kind of explore if they should be ones that are inducted in the next year's selection process or in the future. So there's 4 in particular I wanted to look at, John, and I just real quick want to go through each name. We can do kind of a quick hit on how we feel about each. Let's start off with Andrew Jones. So Andrew Jones, this is only his 2nd year on the ballot. He got 61.6% last year, and he got 66.2% this year. So 5% jump, close, only 10% away from getting over the threshold. What are your thoughts on Andrew? Is he someone that should get over that bar eventually and get selected?
Yes, he is such an interesting case because the way he's commonly perceived is that he was incredible for the first chunk of his career, and then he just fell completely off a cliff. Mm-hmm. And I want to challenge that a little bit. Agreed. From age 19, which is really young to enter the majors, to age 30, he was one of the greatest. Frankly, he was one of the greatest outfielders ever to play the game. His offensive numbers were very, very good. Not like Joe DiMaggio, Willie Mays, good, but really, really, really good. But he had an all-time elite glove. And so you combine those 2 things as far as a total player. From age 19 to 30, he was an all-timer. And then he just kind of fell off, right? Injuries hit, he fell off. But here's the thing. It was really a playing time issue. His rate stats were still pretty good. Look, age 33 with Chicago, the White Sox. He only had 278 at-bats. But he still hit 19 homers, and he had 120 OPS plus, on-base plus, slugging plus, which like ERA plus is adjusted for the era in which you play. 120 is outstanding. This is age 33. And age 34 with the Yankees, he only had 190 at-bats, but he hit 13 homers, had 126 OPS plus. So it wasn't that his skill level really dropped off. It was that the injuries knocked him down. So
Yes.
that matters, right? The injuries matter, and that affects your overall resume. But he was a great baseball player for a really long time. 5 times in the top 16 in MVP voting, 5-time All-Star, 10-time Gold Glove winner. I definitely think he should be in the Hall of Fame. I can see why people are scared off voting for him. If I had a ballot, which nobody's come to me and offered me one, but if I had one, I would vote him in. I think he deserves to be in the Hall of Fame.
I'm with you. I would give Andrew the nod. I think he does deserve it. I think he will get it before year 10. I mean, like you said, just the dominance that he displayed early on. This guy, I mean, you could feasibly have a conversation about, if we're talking about the greatest outfielders ever to play, you could talk about Andrew and make a case for him 100%. He almost missed the 500 home run mark, even with the shortened career because of injuries. His career wins above replacement. His career WAR was 62.7. Also, considering the shortened ability that he was able to play at. I try and if players have legitimate injury issues that shorten their career, that means a lot to me. I think that should factor in to deciding if they get in or not, because there's something different between just naturally tapering off and, you know, letting your career go a little too long or not maintaining a certain standard. But if injuries hit through no fault of your own and cut a great career short, I think that needs to be factored in. That's me personally. So I would give Andrew the nod as well.
Yep, and we'll actually touch on that when we get to the last part of our time about who we should consider voting in that's no longer available, you know, to be voted on. But I won't rush us to that point. But I agree with you on that. That's a good point.
So we've got 2 for Andrew. Then let's go to Carlos Beltran. Carlos is in his 7th year on the ballot. He's gotten some. He's close. He started off at 7.3%. And he now, as of this last year, is at 70.3%. So he's close, John. He's got 3 years left. He's only 5% away. What's your take on Carlos Beltran, in or out?
This is one of the hardest ones for me because I think he has a Hall of Fame resume. He was an outstanding player at his peak. He had a number of great seasons. He was multiple-time All-Star. He was in the MVP running several times. He won the Rookie of the Year, multiple Gold Gloves, multiple Silver Sluggers. You know, hit 435 career home runs, career OPS plus of 119. He did a lot of things really well. Great postseason numbers. All that being said, I cannot get over the cheating scandal. I can't get past it. Now, I'm going to be accused when we talk about a player a little bit later. I'm going to be accused of being a total hypocrite on this. I'll explain my hypocrisy later. But for me right now, he just doesn't make it. He great player, probably a Hall of Fame resume. And I think for a lot of voters, the Astros cheating scandal, which he was basically a ringleader of, is hugely problematic and is a reason why a lot of people aren't going to vote for him. But I do think he'll get in eventually.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with you on this in the sense that I think he's going to get in. I think if we look at Andrew and decide, you know, he gets in based on his numbers, Carlos is very close in terms of the same thing. A lot of hardware, you know, amazing home run stats, great outfielder, had injury issues as his career progressed. So with Beltran, I got to give him the nod as well. Yes, the cheating thing is significant, and we see other players being dinged for that as well. As a matter of fact, the next person we're going to talk about also has, you know, had his chances run down because of those accusations. So let's jump into him next. None other than, I'm sure you're my favorite player, John, as Red Sox fans, Gary Sheffield. So Gary,
Sheffield,
10th year on the ballot. He didn't make it. Okay. I'm not smiling. I promise you I'm not. Gary is officially out as of this year.
Yeah, Sheffield had a great career. I mean, he put up really, really, really good numbers, tons of homers. And as a Red Sox fan, I feared him, you know, more than almost anybody when he played for the Yankees. This is a dumb thing, because the way a guy stands at the plate shouldn't matter, but he just looked like he was going to crush every pitch that came his way. And I just hated when he would come up against the Red Sox. I thought he was always going to deliver the big hit. So huge stats for Gary Sheffield. He put up big numbers over the course of his career: 509 homers, 1,600 plus RBI, and was a good hitter. 292 career average. Lots of all-stars in the MVP running. So his resume was excellent. Career OPS plus of 140. At his peak, he was awesome. But the steroid issue is a big one for him, and that I think is what obviously kept him out. And I would keep him out as well. He's not the one I'm talking about when I start getting into hypocrisy. He still is out for me, even though he had an awesome resume.
I'm with you on this as well. I would not vote in Gary Sheffield if I had a vote. He just doesn't have the hardware for me, John. I mean, he was great at the plate. I agree. He terrified me when he came to the plate, especially during his time with the Yankees. But he never won an MVP award. Yes, he got All-Star and Silver Slugger awards, great. Never really an MVP level player. I think you need that type of dominance, that type of hardware to be in the conversation. So there's that. Also, the guy was terrible defensively. We're not talking about a guy that's on the ballot as a DH to get in. He had a negative career defensive WAR. And on top of that, multiple positions they tried him at, he was really bad in the field. So I think that has to factor into it as well. I am very much in awe of his offensive capabilities, but he was expected to be a two-way player when he was playing for these teams, and he just didn't deliver in that way. So Sheffield does not do it for me as well.
Yep.
And that brings us to our last player, your favorite and mine, Alex Rodriguez. So A-Rod, I mean, he's early on in the process, right? This is his fourth year on the ballot, but he hasn't moved too much, John. He started off with 34.3%. And as of this year, he's only gotten to 37.1%. So the needle is not moving forward for him much.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on A-Rod?
Well, now my hypocrisy. Let me explain. To me, he's a Hall of Famer. And obviously he was involved in the steroid scandal, got suspended for a whole year for it. So, okay, why would I say he's in when these other guys with their cheating scandals are not? Mm-hmm. My criteria with respect to the guys who are involved in any sort of cheating scandal is, are their numbers so ridiculously great that even when you take into account the fact that they were involved in this, it's just overwhelming. It's just absolutely overwhelming. Like, to me, Barry Bonds, who won 3 MVPs before he got involved in PEDs. Roger Clemens, who won like 3 or 4 Cy Youngs before he ever started doing PEDs that we are aware of. Like, those guys were already lock Hall of Famers before any of this stuff started happening in their career. So to me, I'm like, those guys, I mean, Clemens' resume for his whole career is a top 5 pitcher of all time, probably. Same thing for Barry Bonds, is the greatest hitter probably ever. I mean, if you just look at the raw numbers. But, so to me, those guys should be in. But same with A-Rod. You look at A-Rod, the numbers just are just insane. 696 career homers, 2,086 RBI. Great hitter for average slugging, 3-time MVP, 14-time All-Star, 10-time Silver Slugger. I mean, and he was also a great fielder at 2 positions. Yeah. And when he got traded to the Yankees, absolutely, he was better than Derek Jeter at shortstop, and Jeter should have been the one to move to third, but you can't do that because it's Derek Jeter. Right. So his A-Rod's dominance, if you just look at the numbers, he's one of probably the top 3 or 4 greatest baseball players in the history of the world. So obviously he's a Hall of Fame player. Yeah, you ding him significantly for the PEDs. But even if you ding him significantly, you're still looking at a 500 home run, 1,500 RBI, 2-time MVP. Like, it's like you're still looking at a guy like that, who at his peak was considered the best player in baseball. So to me, I would vote for him. But a player's got to be kind of at this level to overcome the steroids or a cheating scandal, and he clearly gets there. I think he should be in the Hall of Fame.
I like how you said it last year, John. I was reviewing the episode from last week that we did, and you had mentioned, kind of like you said, if they're that good, and I think the way you would put it in the last episode, paraphrasing here, but you said it had to be otherworldly, like aliens among humans kind of stats.
Right.
I think that's accurate. And you can't talk about those types of players that put up those types of numbers without talking about A-Rod. He was that good. He was that amazing. Now, for me personally, I put him in the Hall. I'm okay with the PED users being put in the Hall as long as they get the asterisk. That's me. I think that that's a fair trade-off, because to me, it just doesn't feel like the Hall of Fame is the Hall of Fame without guys like McGuire and A-Rod and Bonds and these types of, and Clemens. So these types of guys, for me, if we're going to have a Hall of Fame, we have to celebrate accomplishment. The moral part is important, but I don't think it should supersede. And I think we can let people know, future generations, this is what happened in that regard with, being able to get a physical advantage through using PEDs. Okay, give him the asterisk. But like you said, running down the numbers, A-Rod, no question. He's got to be in there. So that's where I lay on that.
Yep, totally makes sense to me. Just a great, ridiculously good, otherworldly baseball player. Should be in the Hall of Fame.
Yep. As much as I love to root against him when he was on the Yankees, there's just no denying he was amazing. Absolutely.
Yep, for sure.
So there's other names we could go through of, players on the ballot that did not get in. These are the ones that tended to be the most household familiar names, the ones that got the highest percentage of the ones that didn't get in. So we'll track these as we go into next year and see what the jumps are. So that brings us to our final section, John. We went through, we talked about those that were selected. We talked about those that didn't quite make it. Now we get to do a little fun what if, where if you and I had a magic wave of our wand or a stroke of the pen, who we would want to see get into the Hall of Fame if we got to be dictator for a day over the Hall of Fame. So I'd like to start with you. Who's that player across baseball history, regardless of if they've been on the ballot or not, would you vote for to get in?
Can I cheat and name two guys? It's your show.
Go for it.
You have to give me permission to do that. Okay, two guys. All right. The first one is one of my all-time favorite players, Nomar Garciaparra. We talked earlier about the injury issues, right? And so his career tailed off because of injuries. No fault of his own. His body broke down. His numbers were ridiculous, though. As a shortstop, he just put up crazy numbers. Look at some of these peak years. Okay, 1997, 209 hits, 44 doubles, 11 triples, 30 homers, batted .306. 1998, 35 homers, 122 RBI, batted .323. 1999, 42 doubles, 27 homers, batted .357. 2000, 51 doubles, 21 homers, batted .372. Down to 2002, he got hurt in 2001. 2002, 56 doubles, 24 homers, 120 RBI, .310 batting average. Just absurd. 6-time All-Star. He was in the MVP voting, the top 10, 5 times. 6-time All-Star, 7-time top 15 MVP, won the Rookie of the Year. You could just go on and on about the quality of player that he was.
Yep.
The big picture counting numbers aren't there because his injuries really came into play. But even at that, he had a career batting average of .313, a career OPS of .882. That's career. For a shortstop is ridiculous. And he was, at his prime, he was considered the peer of A-Rod and Jeter. Both, obviously, we just talked about A-Rod clearly should be in the Hall of Fame, and Jeter got in easily on the first ballot. So this guy, at his best for a long period of time, was every bit the equal of those guys, and then injuries got him. And I just think I would like to honor the incredible player that he was and see him in the Hall of Fame at some point. He's always been a favorite of mine, so I personally want to see that happen. The other guy is Curt Schilling. Talk about a guy with a Hall of Fame resume. 216 wins, which at this point in time is a ton. Great ERA of 3.46 over the course of his career. He has, I don't remember if it's exactly number one or he's up in the top group of strikeouts to walk ratio. He just didn't walk guys, struck out a ton. Postseason legend, one of the great postseason careers of all time. He was top 4 in the Cy Young voting 4 times. Didn't win it. He had 3 second-place finishes. So at his peak, he was right there, considered among the best in baseball. 6-time All-Star, 4-time top 15 MVP voting, 3-time world champ, which is no small thing. And he was the ace of two of those teams. I guess you could say co-ace with Randy Johnson in Arizona.
Yeah.
He's an NLCS MVP, World Series MVP. I mean, the guy had a tremendous baseball career. What's keeping him out is the post-baseball life of Curt Schilling. The political stuff, the scandal with the finances with his gaming company in Rhode Island, and I think it's mostly the political stuff, right? He just has turned people completely off to him as a human being. I understand that, and voters vote the way they want. If you don't like a guy, you just don't vote for him. I totally get that. But if we're just talking about baseball, this guy was Hall of Fame resume as a baseball player, I think, and I think he should be in the Hall of Fame. I'd like to see it. Plus, he had the legendary bloody sock game. You know what I mean? Like he had an iconic moment, that will never be forgotten. So I don't know. I think he deserves to be in.
I mean, the bloody sock's already in the Hall of Fame, so just put the rest of his body next to it, and we're good to go.
Exactly. Those are
two interesting picks. Yeah, I love them. Those were two I hadn't really considered, even being a Red Sox fan. You make a good case for both. I would be interested to hear what our listeners think, so we'll make sure to put up polls for that for both individuals, see if we can get some traction going for them. For me, John, I'm going back to the well. This was the guy that I talked about last year. I'm staying on this train until someone from the BWAA or one of the errors committees decides to hear me and take this under consideration. So who I would choose to get into the Hall of Fame is none other than pitcher Johan Santana. Let me tell you why. Johan Santana got a late start in his MLB career. He didn't start as a full-time starter until 25 years old. So his career wasn't as long as other pitchers. Just keep that in mind, all right? He only pitched 12 seasons, but he was one of the top 3 pitchers in baseball from 2002 to 2010. He had an 8-year, just undeniably amazing stretch of pitching. When we talk about CC being one of those guys during his peak, Johan Santana was that guy. And if he had played for a larger market team besides the Twins, I think he would have been talked about and celebrated a lot more than he was, even though he was just that guy for Minnesota. So let me run down these stats, all right? He led the American League and the National League in ERA during that stretch. He led in strikeouts, in fielding independent pitching, and hits per 9 innings, and pitching wins above replacement 3 times apiece, and his whip 4 times, and innings twice. So just putting that all together, unbelievable stretch that he had of dominance. He threw the first no-hitter in New York Mets history when he went over to play with the Mets after the Twins. He had 2 Cy Young Awards, which means a lot to me. That, for me, is the threshold. If you got to get 2 Cy Youngs to get in, at least if you're going to be in the conversation. We put CC in with 1. Just saying, okay? Keep in mind, too, he missed that 3rd Cy Young Award. He was up for it because he didn't win as many games as Bartolo Colon in 2005. I think that if he had started more games and won that season, he would have gotten over and gotten that 3rd Cy Young during that stretch. So there's 11 pitchers that have won 3 Cy Young Awards who are in the Hall right now. And Roger Clemens could be the 12th that comes into that. So to me, a guy that won 2 Cy Young Awards was absolutely one of the best pitchers during that stretch. And the only reason that he slowed down was because of debilitating injuries. Johan Santana absolutely deserves to get a second look at getting into the Hall. Not on the ballot anymore. He was on the ballot in 2018. But you need 5%, I believe, a 5% threshold to stay on the ballot to continue into the next year. He only got 2.4%, but he was only looked at once by the writers and then was off. I think he deserves a second look. That's my pick.
Yeah, I mean, he was awesome. I love your thinking on him. He was a little less than, but career similar to Koufax, right? Short, uber dominant for a short period of time, and then injuries kind of basically ended it. That year you talked about where he finished second to Bartolo Colon in the Cy Young voting in 2005. I want you to think about this. You've mentioned wins above replacement, and I don't think that's the be-all, end-all stat, and I know you're not saying it is, but it does comprise a lot of different factors in their formulas. That year, Cologne won the Cy Young. He was 21-8 with a 3.48 ERA. Great season. Johansson, he had 4.0 wins above replacement. Santana, 16-7, 2.87 ERA, 238 strikeouts. Santana had a 7.2 wins above replacement, almost double that of Cologne, and he finished third in the Cy Young. He totally deserved the Cy Young that year over Cologne. No shade to Cologne, who's everybody's fan favorite, but Santana was by far a better pitcher that year than Cologne was. Should have easily won the Cy Young. I know back then WAR wasn't really even a thing that people talked about. They just kind of looked at the wins, that sort of thing as the big factor. I mean, this always bothered me about the I think it was 1990 Cy Young vote when Bob Welch won it over I think it was Bob Welch won it over Clemens. Welch won it. No, it was Zito. I think it was Barry Zito who won it because he had 27 wins, which was great. But Clemens dominated him in every other category, and was by far a better pitcher. But because Zito won 27, he won the Cy Young. It's kind of similar situation here. Santana definitely was a superior pitcher. Should have had a third Cy Young for sure. I agree.
I mean, thank you. Yeah, I think with him, you have to look at the injury, proneness that occurred in his career, because this guy was at the top of the mountain. And then just to see it all come crashing down, he never, after age 31, he never pitched more than 21 games. And he only started at age 25. So that's a 6-year window. You know what I'm saying, John? And then after that, just never had the health to be able to continue that stretch, that amazing stretch that he put together. So yeah, Johan's my guy. So again, we'll put those up for the public to judge us and see where they go with this in terms of if they agree or not. We are very excited to hear your feedback. Thank you in advance for that. So to round things out, John, now that we've finished our conversation, people have gotten to know you a little bit better. First-time listeners, I'm sure, have very much enjoyed this conversation we've had. So I'd like to give a chance for people to find out how can they further connect with you outside of this episode. What do you have going on? How can people get in touch with you and see what you're doing?
Well, thanks. I appreciate that. Really, the thing to think about for me is the work that I do with the student athletes. I work at the University of Connecticut in the athletic department, serving in sports ministry. Love serving the coaches and the athletes. I've served as the chaplain for the football team, and it was great because UConn went to the Fenway Bowl this year, and that game was played. They beat Bill Belichick. He wasn't coaching it at the time, but beat Bill Belichick's North Carolina Tar Heels on the field at Fenway. I got to be down on the sidelines for that game. My first time ever on the actual grass of Fenway, which is exciting. I walked over and touched the green monster, which was really, really cool for me. So that was a great experience, but it's a blast working with the athletes. But as far as being an author goes, which is probably more interesting to some folks paying attention here, the books that I've been able to write have been a lot of fun for me. You can find me at johnvampatella.com. I just submitted a manuscript to my agent that I hope gets accepted by a publisher. And this story is really unlike anything I've written before. I won't spill the beans too much, but it's an incredible story of combat search and rescue in the Vietnam War. There was an incident that my uncle actually was involved in that led to just this. It was almost like a Black Hawk Down type scenario. It was a mission that went horribly wrong. But in that mission, there was just tons of heroic deeds that took place. And it's an incredible story of courage, of loyalty, of bravery, that sort of thing. And the manuscript's done, and I'm hoping that we get that published by the end of this calendar year. So you can keep track at johnvampatella.com. And there's a section there where you can order books, or you can ask me questions. You can get a hold of me through that. So that's probably the best way to do that.
Exciting, John. You heard it here first, folks. I'm excited to when that book gets published, John. I would love to give it a read. Love the other two that you put out. So do you think we can do this again next year? Are you feeling up to doing a 2026 episode?
Let me think. Talking baseball with you. I really want to do that. Yeah, 100%. Anytime you want to talk, I am game for that.
Love it. Folks, mark your calendars. Late January next year, we're going to come back and do this again. John, thanks for coming on the show. As always, great to have you.
Thanks, Jeff. Really appreciate it.